Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I hope that I plan that this will be the last, actually the last of this series. After which I'll take a break in Hashem for the summer, and then we'll resume after the summer. Probably after Yom Tov, actually, yeah, because the way yeah, got a lot of Shabbos and Sundays this year. Yeah, okay, very inconvenient. From the point of view of this year, we've got working and other aspects. Okay, I want to introduce this share with a double warning about modesty, because in this share we're going to look at the modern ability to say Peshat. In other words, and in a sense, this is what I've been building up to really, which is to what degree are the drashas of Chazal the only way of reading Passukim, or are there other tools we can bring to bear on understanding Peshuto Shel Mikra? Is Peshuto Shel Mikra just the endeavor of choosing the Midrash Chazal that are best miyashev Mikra Alefanov, that just create a smooth reading of Passukim, as Rashi tells us several times? Is there any legitimacy in us looking at Passukim and learning a Peshat in them that wasn't expressed by Chazal or previous generations? The Rashbam speaks about the Peshatim and Hajjs b'chol yom, the innovative Peshatim that we are coming up with in our base Midrash on a daily basis. And once we have the rules of Rav Tzadok about using reason, or Rav Tzadok, if you remember, said 4 rules of taking Passukim out of Peshuto, out of the simplest translation, and having some expanded version of Peshat. He said this can be because of tradition. The example he gave was Aboim Yakenu, the 40 Makkos, which we understand to mean 39. We said it can be because it's against reason or against observation of the senses. Is that something that we can extend nowadays to doing and use scientific evidence to understand that Passukim need to be understood differently? To what degree does this endeavor of learning Peshat still, is it still a legitimate approach today? So, and before we start this, I just want to, in a sense, appeal to modesty on a double level. The first is, in order to be able to advance a Peshat, one needs to have the skills necessary to so do. One needs to be a master of the text we're looking at, Tanakh. One needs to understand Lashon HaKodesh to a superlatively good level. One needs to know the translation of words and where else they appear in Tanakh, and the ability to compare and contrast those appearances. One needs to know the laws of Dikduk, inside out and back to front. And this is the first sort of level of modesty that one needs. Now, I mention this because the comments I made last week based on Rav Tzadok probably generated more questions off group and after sharing from those who listen online and so on, and the YouTube listeners, around the subject of surely this opens a terrible can of worms, suggesting that we can use reason or observation to retranslate Passukim, and it does open a can of worms, 100%. I mean, even in the live share, there were a couple of questions around this. It does open a can of worms. Sometimes they need to be opened, and I can't hide what's said, but we definitely need a sense of modesty around our knowledge and our ability to come up with these Peshatim Hamischadshim b'chol yom. Is it legitimate to do so with someone who has such a mastery? We see that it is done. We saw, and I'm not comparing ourselves to the Ramban, but we saw the Ramban who relooks at Keshes, the meaning of the rainbow story, based upon the insight of the Greeks using science. It's one example of several times the Ramban does this on Torah. There's a parsha of Isha ki Sazria, a woman who gives it seeds, it gives birth, and halachas associated with that. And the Ramban plays with the translation of this phraseology, Isha ki Sazria, based upon the thinking of the Greeks and their understanding of science of reproduction and the like. So Ramban does this in several areas. And that's an application of Rav Tzadok's principles using modern science in a sense. And then we look at Peshutim and Hajjs Chol Yom, the innovation of new Peshutim. And we see that in recent times also. We look at the wealth of literature, of Torah, of teaching that was generated by relatively late figures, the Netziv, the Hamekdava, the Meshech Chochmah, Samson Raphael Hirsch, through to people that lived in our own lifetimes, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky and the MS Yaakov. So very mainstream, traditional Gedolim, traditional Talmid Chachomim, were willing to relook at Passukim and come up with Peshutim of their own, which aren't found in the Ramban, aren't found in Rashi, aren't found in Chazal. But these were figures who had a mastery of Tanakh and a mastery and the knowledge of Dikduk, and that's the first appeal to modesty that I would make. I'll say a little more on this, which is that when I look at the realm of modern Parshanut, stuff going on today, innovative ideas being put forward by thinkers in the 2000s, there are some figures that clearly have a incredible mastery of Tanakh, and the ideas they come up with are dazzling and beautiful and very convincing. In the base Midrash associated with Gush, the Gush Yeshiva, there's a renewed, it's one of the leaders in this renewed focus on Peshat and Parshanut, and there's some extraordinary Talmid Chachomim there who are doing amazing work and very clearly qualified to do this and have a real depth of understanding of Tanakh and of Dikduk. And then there's figures who are coming up with stuff that's really just very poor and very weak and very unconvincing, and many times they say very stridently with great confidence shot him in Passukim, and they're not really qualified. They don't have a proper understanding of Dikduk and Pshat and so on. These are difficult fields to master. I happen to be no expert on Dikduk, sadly. I come from a family where I have siblings who are extraordinary experts and often consult them. But I know it's its own chalik of Torah, and people have to know what they know and what they don't know. So that's the first thing I would say. It's an appeal to modesty. We have to be careful here. We're talking about Devar Hashem, the words of Hashem, and interpreting anew what it means. It has to be done confidently. The truth is that the first appeal to modesty is not a frum appeal. It's just like in any field. If you're a first-year law student, don't come up with innovative legal reasoning. If you're a first-year science student, don't think you'll come up with a theory that debunks string theory. In any field, you have to know your level of competence and your ability to navigate it successfully. And I think in all fields, we know people that try and promote views and so on and just simply don't know what they're talking about. So that's the first appeal to modesty. I do not mean to open, through what I'm saying, a floodgate of anyone being able to say anything. The second appeal to modesty is unique to Torah, which is what we're going to talk about today it revolves around Ikrei Hadas, fundamentals of faith. We're going to be looking at the opening chapters of Bereshis and seeing what we can say in them based upon relatively recent scientific insight. And as soon as we're dealing with Ikrei Hadat, with principles of faith, and so on, it makes sense to have a certain modesty about what one's saying. And the truth is, I think that there are figures who would look at some of ideas around these subjects and say that these are approaching kfira, these are dangerous ideas to say, and I think they are correct that talking about these matters is sensitive. And to me, the best defense, and I don't mean defense in a PR sense, I mean fundamentally, intrinsically, the safety around this is that anything said on this matter, I think should be said sensitively, should be said with a great sense of modesty. It's exploring ideas rather than coming down with anything definitive. I personally, I think these issues are very hard to grapple with, and even forming a judgment around the science that lies behind them is not at all simple and not at all black and white. So if one says this with a strident self-confidence, I think some of these ideas can be playing with fire. Whereas if one's just exploring approaches and ways of dealing with issues, I can't see that that's problematic. So those are my two appeals to modesty, and I really mean them. This is not just a sort of thing. I think they're really, really important. Otherwise, it's better not to talk about these things.
Definitively wrong. That comes from historically speaking. Or are you just saying that others would say it's not that billions of this is the problem? It's a one-sided problem.
In a sense, I'm ducking the question, and let me first of all, yes, it's a two-sided problem, but more than that, look, I'm not a scientist. That's not my field. I try to read science as a sort of educated layperson, and make the best sense of it as I can. So someone would say to me, well, what's your opinion about the age of the universe? The real honest answer would be, how can I have an opinion? I don't understand any of the science sufficiently to have an opinion. I can make comments about how a person should navigate their way through life. It seems to me that following consensus of scientists' opinion is a reasonable way to operate. I took that stance when it came to obeying COVID rules, and I take that stance in other areas of life also. I'm not a scientist, but in any area of life, you have to be able to choose expertise. If you have a question on tax law and you know nothing about tax law, I know nothing about tax law, then I need to consult someone who does know about tax law, and that makes sense. So all of us have to find ways to navigate life and consult experts and be able to choose experts to help us in fields that we don't know. How do I know who's a good lawyer and a poor lawyer? So there's various tools that I use. I see who's respected by their peers, because I don't really have the skill set to judge who's a good lawyer or not. I meet someone and try and see whether they have professional qualifications. I meet someone and see whether they seem to have the personality that listens to my question, gives me the time that I need. They seem to show modesty and an openness to looking at things and relooking at things and being challenged. And if they cross that threshold, that's the best you can really do in finding in finding an expert in any field. So we have to use these tools to navigate these questions also. Then the question that's raised is this the same as other areas of science? So are there weaknesses in using science to speculate about the past as opposed to make predictions about the future? So to that, we need to turn to the philosophers of science. And the problem is I'm no philosopher of science either. I'm simply a layperson trying to read my way through these. There are philosophers of science who think that the scientific endeavor is best carried out when it puts forward models, makes predictions about the future, and sees whether these predictions are carried out. They argue that science going into the past is sort of science taking on itself a domain which it was never qualified to do. And there's other philosophers of science that think that's nonsense. So I don't feel a particular rabbinic duty to persuade or dissuade anyone from belief in models of the age of the universe or evolution or the like. I don't see it as the area that I've been qualified to teach. What I do see as my area to say is, for those who are convinced of the truth of these theories and think it crosses a threshold of Rasad Yugan's criteria of observation of the senses or reason, what can we do when we look at the Passukim and how can we navigate it? I have no desire to convince anyone of a problem from these sources. If someone is happy, it's interesting. I met Professor Chaim Soloveitchik. He came to Nair about 7 years ago, I think, and I had the enormous privilege of a very lengthy conversation with him for about 2 hours around a range of matters. And I really offloaded on him tens of questions I had about the thinking of Soloveitchik and the history of the Soloveitchik family. He's a historian, he's a Talmud Chacham, and it's one of the most remarkable experiences of my life, actually speaking to him. I've countless stories that emerged from this. I'll share one that's completely off topic, but since I've got on the subject, I asked him to what degree Soloveitchik understood every piece of Reb Chaim Briska's Torah. Reb Chaim Soloveitchik has a Chiddush Reb Chaim, which has become really canonical in our derech, in the modern derech halimud, in the derech halimud of Lomdas. But not every piece is as easy to understand as every other piece, and I asked him what pieces Rav Soloveitchik understood and didn't understand of it. So he closes his eyes and he says, okay, so, and he begins going through, so in Hilchas Talmud Torah, the third paragraph beginning with V'hinei, he didn't understand, and in Hilchas Me'ilah, and for about 10 minutes, he's working his way through the Sefer. With his eyes closed, through piece by piece, the sort of, 24 pieces across the Sefer that Rav Soloveitchik didn't understand. It's a remarkable experience. So I asked him about his father's views on these issues of Torah and science and Torah evolution, because there's almost nothing that we have from Rav Soloveitchik on these topics. He has one book, The Emergence of Ethical Man, in which there's maybe a paragraph in which he speaks about this. There's basically nothing he has on it. And he said to me, I don't believe my father spent more than 20 minutes ever thinking about, maybe he said 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I don't remember, ever thinking about the subject. So he actually didn't bother thinking about it. It wasn't his area. As much as he was someone who addressed modernity, he was a philosopher, he was very interested in philosophy, and he never bothered giving any great intellectual effort to resolving the creation story and modern science. It wasn't something that particularly interested him or he didn't turn to. So not everyone has to deal with every issue in life. And I'm no agenda here in taking a particular stance in the debate that rages around these topics amongst scientists, amongst philosophers of science, other than to observe the majority of physicists and the majority of biologists definitely buy into this. And therefore, for someone who is interested in this, it deserves to be taken seriously. So that's I hope that sort of answers your question.
I was at the show, 99 given by Rob from Gates.
Yeah.
And he said, for all you a lot of people there, he said, for all you teachers in the audience, you to teach your pupils that the world is old and 5, 7, whatever it was, though, it says complete conference.
Yeah.
Let's not do that, stop listening to us. So I'm just wondering whether, because it's a centuries old view, almost.
So just so those aligned to repeat the question. The question is it fewer to teach a view other than the world being 5,700 or whatever years old? The argument I'm putting forward is that this dating is based on a reading of the Passukim, which is certainly the simplest reading of the Passukim, and based on the Masorah that we have from the Seder Torah, from Rabbi Zobin, who aligns the dates in Tanakh and is the source of Rashi's reading of when we go through Tanakh, much dating is clear and much dating is unclear. We spoke here about resolving the 400 years, the 430 years, the 210 years. So Rashi, and then things that we are very familiar with because Rashi adopted this stance, that Rivka was 3 when she married Yitzchak and things like that. So Rashi got all of that from a brisa in which it sorts out the dates, and the brisa was ascribed to Rabbi Yotze. Some of these dates may be machlokas tanoim, but that's where these dates emerge from. Would it be legitimate to relook at some of the stories and relations, and for example, argue that Yom shouldn't be understood as a 24-hour block of time? So based on Rasadio Gaon's criteria, if you are of the opinion that the literal sense is negated by reason or negated by observation of the senses, which are the 2 relevant criteria of Rasadio Gaon, then you would be entitled to do so. And you would argue that this is no worse than what we all do without even thinking about it, which is using reason to dictate that when it talks about Yod Chazaka or Zoya Natuya, it doesn't mean literal hands of God or Eini Hashem Ekechaba. It'd be the same as a more recent development, which just has slipped in without really much discussion, in which when we talk about Boichein Kloyos Velev, that Hashem checks the kidneys and the hearts on the judgment of Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, that again is a metaphor. It doesn't mean that literally the kidneys and the hearts are the seats of decisions that we make. If one is convinced that the threshold of observation of the senses or reason has been crossed, then it would be legitimate to do the same thing. It would be as legitimate as the Ramban looking at kashes and arguing that when it says that Hashem made the kashes of bris, it means a pre-existing phenomenon, not a newly created phenomena, because of the rules of science. Should one do so with a modesty? I think one should. One should do so with a double modesty. One should do so with a modesty of awareness of limits of expertise in our expertise in translating Lashon HaKodesh and the like, unless one is an expert in the subject, and awareness of one's limits in science and grappling with complicated scientific matters, unless one is an expert in the subject. But given those criteria of modesty, and given a modesty around talking about Ikriyadas, we should be open to the possibility, 100%. I don't think someone should stridently proclaim the opposite either. I think it's I don't see any great mitzvah of stridently convincing people of current scientific thinking. It's not realm. I have no issue with someone who isn't bothered by it. But if someone is, and I'm speaking here, I seem to an audience who is interested in science and somewhat familiar with it, even though I don't think we have any scientists, no actual scientists sitting here. It makes sense for us to talk about this in a manner and be open to the possibility that it crosses the threshold. There is if you just want a source in the matter, there are letters from Samson Raphael Hirsch. So near the end of Samson Raphael Hirsch's life, the theory of evolution began spreading, and he was asked in a letter what his view on the matter was and how to reconcile this with Sefer Bereshis, as was incidentally Rav Kook also, and both make really the following point. They say the following 3 points. The first point they say is that besides the literal questions on the Passukim, there seems to be conceptual questions around accepting these theories. Because besides the fact that Peshuto, Shel, Mikra, the simplest reading of Bereshis doesn't sound like this, conceptually it seems to be very problematic. The idea that a human has evolved from an animal, from an ape, is this a view that's compatible with our understanding of the dignity of a human being and Salam and Akim? Number one. And number two, if these naturalistic explanations are true, does this fit with a Breuer Olam, with the creator of a universe who has created and brought into existence the wonderful universe that we look at? Surely we were meant to look at the Breuer and say, "My God, Hashem, how great are your deeds, Hashem," and a universe in which life and the wonder of life has evolved through random events. Is this a universe in which the beauty of Hashem is demonstrated? And that's the first question they make, the point they raise. And they both answer in different ways, reflecting their different ways of thinking, that we should not be challenged by this question at all. On the contrary, these are models of understanding what human beings are that are very true to our tradition. We've always understood that a human is a remarkable amalgamation of the animal and the spiritual, the animal and angel. We humans have minds which can explore the universe, can soar to great heights, we humans are capable of moral and spiritual achievements, and we're also capable of being monkeys. Like, there shouldn't be a chiddush to us. And we make a choice in our life. That's the choice that we make in life. Do we choose to behave like apes or like angels? That's the choice we make. And if it turns out that we are, the Peshuto Mikra tells us we are made of dust and earth. Dust and earth is no dignified beginning. It's raw material. It's chemicals. It's body. If it turns out that dust and earth went through an ape stage before, and so be it. In other words, that's the first point they make. This is not philosophically wrong. Is this somehow a diminution in Yad Hashem? Hashem created the world and runs it through remarkable laws of nature, and on the contrary, they both in their different languages say, what a wonderful universe it would be if inbuilt into the fabric of the natural working of the universe, such a multiplicity of life can arise. Like what a wonderful creation that is. That so much wonder can emerge. Does this contradict Passukim that say that Hashem did this? Not at all. Hashem did do this. If he does it through the medium of indirect action, so be it. And here we're getting a bit closer to actually reinterpreting Passukim, but so be it. They cite the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, "Vayivin Shlomo." Shlomo built the Beis HaMikdash. Does that mean that Shlomo put stone upon stone and plastered walls himself? Well, we know he didn't, because the Passukim tell us that the artisans did the work and laborers did the work. Vayivin Shlomo means Shlomo built it in the sense of he set into motion and ran the whole apparatus that brought this into existence. With Hashem, not only does he set into motion the apparatus that does it, but he's Machadish B'Tova B'Chol Yom Tovit. He maintains the existence and reality constantly, and therefore we shouldn't be worried about this. The vision that somehow the world has within it the ability to ever improve is a very inspiring vision, a very beautiful vision. The vision that Rav Kook phrases it this way. He says the whole. He doesn't quite phrase it this way. I'm extrapolating what he says. So the whole of religion is dealing with the relationship between the infinite and the finite, and how inherent in the finite, in the limited, is potential for the infinite. So he says, was a wonderful world in which we can see how within finite life, a little chain of DNA that at some point came into existence, from that can emerge the infinite potential of the multiplicity of life that exists. and the infinite potential that is a human being. Again, how wonderful. Humans can achieve things of infinite and absolute worth. We can touch meaning. We can do real things of real value and morality. How amazing is that infinite potential was there buried within the finite that existed? Rav Hirsch says that if we look at one of the messages of Yiddishkeit, of Judaism, which is that the whole multiplicity that exists all has a unity that underlies it. And the ancient world looked at the sun and the moon and the stars, and they saw these all as independent forces, the sun god, the moon god, the gods of storms, the gods of mountains, and so on. And we said, no, behind that lies a unifying force, a single God. There's a me, there's a who that lies behind the Eila, behind the whole multiplicity of these. The one translation of the word Elohim is that it's a combination of the me and the Eila. God is the me, the who, that lies behind the Eila, me bara Eila. Who is the he that created all this Eila, all this multiplicity that exists? So Raphael Hirsch says, how wonderful it would be, if this theory turns out to be true, it's a theory in his age, if it turns out to be true, then how amazing it would be to think that behind the whole plethora of life, the whole multiplicity of life, lies a single underlying origin. And what great example do we have of a fundamental achdus and unity that underlines the whole of creation. Thus says both of Cook and of Hirsch in their different ways in the first point they make in their writings. The second point they make in their writings, which echoes my call for modesty, is they say we are not currently convinced that the science has crossed the threshold of Rasadigon's criteria of reason. In other words, not every speculative scientific theory makes it. And what level of reason should we adopt before we are willing to relook at Passukim? And I'll come to them in a moment. And they both looked at the science as it existed in their time and didn't believe that it had clearly crossed that threshold. It's a theory, it's a nice theory, it's interesting, something to think about, but does it cross the threshold of rewriting Passukim? And I have to tell you, I think this is important and remains important to this day. One of the greatest brachas of Yiddishkeit, it doesn't need my haskama, but one of the blessings of Yiddishkeit is that when there is a new theory put forward, whether it's scientific or philosophical or cultural, we don't just jump to it. We don't get swayed and instantly go after every faddish movement of liberal or political correctness or the like. We need to analyze it. We need to think about it. We need to engage it in conversation with Rav Abayim, with Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel, and with Rambam and Rashi, and that takes time. And we don't react instantly. We shouldn't be ashamed of that. It can take us 20, 30 years to respond. And that's the great strength of working things through and dealing with it and analyzing them and being part of a Masorah and needing to ask, how would this have been understood by previous Doros? We can't just flippantly swing with every latest. Otherwise, again, in the year 1000, we would have read Passukim one way, and the year 1000 judge another way, and it's constantly swing in our understanding of life and morality and everything else. We shouldn't just be swayed. So the threshold that needs to be crossed needs to be quite high. On the other hand, openness to the idea that Torah has to be written in a way which speaks to all generations and therefore can be understood in a multiplicity of ways is one that we should be comfortable with. How else would we want the Torah to be written? Would we want the Torah to be written as in the beginning there was plasma, and then the plasma coalesced into matter, and then the matter eventually became organic matter, and stars began creating fusion reactions, which created heat. Is that a heat? Is that a way to write Passukim? And just because the Passukim would be readable to us in 2023 like that, would they be readable to anyone in 1023 or indeed in 3023? Would it make sense to readers at the time? So they both voice a modesty around this, and to what degree has this crossed the threshold? And that question, by the way, remains to this day. In other words, to this day, to what degree has the science crossed the threshold or not? In my very amateur limited reading of the theories, it seems to me that there's much that's very convincing in them. And there's still questions out there. And I think it's acknowledged by the more thoughtful physicists and biologists. So this is the second point that they make. I'll give you 1 second, and I'll say third point, and then I'll take with you answers. So first point is philosophical. Should we find these theories challenging philosophically? Neither of them are particularly bothered by them. If this is how Hashem chose in his wisdom to bring the beauty of creation to existence, so be it. Second point, be very cautious before we rewrite Passukim. Have these theories crossed the threshold of reason and observation of the senses? And to this day, that certainly needs profound thought before one jumps to a conclusion. And the third point they make is, if the theory were to cross the threshold, it would be legitimate to reread the Passukim like that. So to my view, this means that we are neither in the thinking of these great thinkers, we are neither falling into the trap of apologetics nor into the trap of kafira. And I just want to explain what I mean. Is it kafira, is it heretical to reread the Passukim based upon scientific insight now? I think they have both told us it is not kafira. It has to cross a threshold of reason and the senses. If someone is mistaken and they've misanalyzed the science and the science hasn't crossed the threshold and they reread the Passukim, they are making a mistake in science, not kafira. They think it's crossed the threshold, and now they're making a mistake. If they do so with a strident arrogance, I think one ends up with a revolt against Masorah. If you do so with attentive modesty, and you say, currently scientific thinking seems to indicate this, to my mind, the science is convincing, and therefore it is a legitimate approach to look at the Passukim, and this is how I can live with, this is how I understand Torah based upon scientific thinking. I think both Samson Raphael Hirsch and Rav Kook have taught us this is not a rupture with Masorah, this is not a breach with Masorah, and we don't need to be concerned about it. Is it wrong or right? Has the science crossed the threshold or not? Good question, needs to be worked through. If one declares it stridently, could this be a rupture in Masorah? Yes. But if one in an attentive and modest way looks at Passukim and is willing to reread them, I think they have taught us that this is allowed. The second thing this has taught us, this isn't apologetics. Apologetics is when you need to explain away in embarrassment every time a pasuk in the Torah or a value in Yiddishkeit contradicts current thinking, one has to sort of apologize it away and readjust. And that's not what they're saying. They're saying we have within our Masorah tools such as that of Rav Sadugan, in which he says it's acceptable for Torah to be read through the eyes of reason, and which Baruch gave the Torah to us, and we humans are reasonable. And it's okay that in different times and eras in history, the Torah will be read differently based upon the understanding of the time. And Adrabah, how else would we expect the Torah to be written? Rashi teaches us, and with this I'll finish my little bit and I'll hand the questions. Rashi teaches us that the Torah was never meant to be a book of history. It was meant to be a book of teaching us how to live our lives looking forward. A certain understanding of where we came from is necessary in that project for whatever reason. But the understanding is sufficient if it's written in a way that can be understood in different times and different eras in history in a different manner. I'm going to pause now to take questions, but what I would like to do before I finish is actually have a brief look at some of the Passukim, and I want to argue that actually, in a sense, none of this is necessary, because we have in our classic tradition, without innovative readings, so much openness to in a sense, a more conceptual reading of these Passukim, which avoids many of these concerns, that I actually don't think we need to engage in modern day rereading significantly. But whether I'm wrong or right, I think this is an honest introduction to the idea. Rav Hirsch, Rav Kook, and others were open to so doing, based in each in their own way, in their own way of thinking, on these thoughts of Rav Sadugan and the path of the Rambam in his Moreh Nevuchim and others taught us. Sorry, no,
For the concept of time. If you, how do you square this up regarding Shabbos? Because I mean, Torah is very specific about the days of creation. It comes to and makes whole big thing of Vayikulu.
Yeah.
And this is a linchpin of Shabbos, basically.
Yeah.
Once you start fiddling around with time, and I understand I've heard all the various arguments, but at the end of the day, you're taking Peshuto, Mikra, and you're redefining Shabbos, basically.
So I want to say two things to that. So the question again for those online is, at the end of the Torah, the linchpin of Yiddishkeit is Shabbos. And Shabbos, is the seventh day, is based upon Peshuto Shel Mikra, of the understanding of the 7 days of creation. So I want to say 2 points to this. And this is really why I spent so many weeks belaboring these points. Number one, in a minute I'm going to say I don't think the question is a question at all, but even were it to be the case, we saw the Rashbam and others who said that, who operated in a world in which halacha is determined by one level of reading, and Peshuto Shel Mikra is determined at another level of reading. And we saw controversy around the Rashbam. Was it acceptable to the Rashbam to say that Peshuto Shel Mikra, the night follows the day, and in halacha, the day follows the night? Even the opponents of the Rashbam, however, accept the concept of doing it on other occasions. The question is how far you go. You have an Ibn Ezra who does it. Ibn Ezra is no karoi. That's for Shalom. Part of the purpose of his work is to battle the Karaim, and yet he's willing to give Peshuto Shmikra that argues with the Midrashic understanding which determines halacha. Even the Rambam is willing to give Peshutim sometimes that are against Chazal. So that's the first point, which is in learning Peshuto Shmikra, to what degree does this need to align with the halacha, how we take things. The second point, though, which I think is the more correct point over here, is if it turns out that 7 days of creation means 7 conceptual days, or a clock that's used to measure the passage of time is different to the clock that we currently use, that doesn't mean that we can't still translate across to how we now see and experience the concept of a day. In a sense, I'll refer you to something that you have shared here in this shir itself, and we both have heard from Ramesh Shapiro, who in turn comes from the thinking of the Mekabalim. This is something that needs a lot more thought and analysis. But they've got them again and again say the following language. They say, Zobin, don't say that Yad Chazaka shouldn't be understood literally. It's an outstretched arm, doesn't mean literally a strong hand, or Zroyam doesn't mean an outstretched arm. It's the other way around. Hashem has the real Yad. Hashem has the real Zroya. Hashem has the real Ayin. Hashem has the real eye. What we have is the pale imitation of the eye. What we have is the pale imitation of the arm. And what they mean by that on one level is that if an eye is a vehicle of vision, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's above time and space, has more than vision. We can't even say he has vision because vision is too limited. Vision means photons pinging our eye and triggering changes in an optic nerve. If Hashem has more than vision, so he has the real eye, he has the greatest, and what we have is a perceptive ability, which is a mere shadow or pale reflection of the depth of perceptive ability. So in the language of if one wishes to go sort of the path of the mystics, one would say a similar thing. Don't say that we're saying that the days of creation are not literal days. On the contrary, what's being described is the real day, the real concept of a passage of time, of a metabolic cycle, a spiritual cycle. And what we have is the pale imitation of that concept of a day. So if you understand the 7 days of creation referring to conceptual days, spiritual days, days that use a different sort of clock. What clock would we be using when we're talking about Hashem who's above time and space? What clock would we be using in a world in which there isn't yet a sun that's rising and a sun that's setting, at least for the first few days of the first 3 days of creation? So we translate that in halacha takes that concept, the more powerful spiritual concept, and translates it into our lived experience of the 7 days of creation. So the first point I'm saying is, the truth is, I think both points are identical, because the first, however we square the circle, for some reason or other, great thinkers from Rashi in some ways, to a greater extent the Rashbam, the Ibn Ezra, even the Ramban, think there's an endeavor, a purpose in learning Torah, in which you read Peshat and you read Midrash, and they have different messages, and yet somehow they are both true. So however you deal with it, you have to come up to a nuanced, complex creation, a nuanced, complex Torah. A Torah in which the Ibn Ezra thinks it's okay to say there's something very grand and great and a tzidkus associated with the Nimrod, at the same time as knowing that Nimrod is a thorough rotter and an absolute Rasha. And somehow both have meaning in communication. And I don't know what to make of it. No, the Ibn Ezra doesn't tell us his philosophy, but we can speculate that we saw these Passukim, that maybe he understands that even a great Rasha, like a Nimrod, has aspects that are very admirable to him, and it's worth learning both. So all I'm arguing with is the same in how, in this model, how we should approach even Sheish Mei Bereshis, the 7 days of creation. There's a reading in which it should be understood as days, because this is what we humans connect to. This is how we experience the cycle of life. And there's a reason in which we can have a more nuanced or subtle or spiritual or conceptual or sophisticated understanding of what time and how time works. And that's also acceptable. And I don't see a challenge. I can't see a challenge in that. Sorry, Gav.
Why is the modesty and innovation this topic? Why is it confined to this integration? And also to these readings where anyone that listens to this out of Rashi gives loads of chapters and there's any way apart that anyone wants to take yet any story.
So
there's any way sort of self-class and deciding what part of the narrative to go.
So I'll say 3 points. Number one, I think modesty is always a good thing. I agree with you. It's not particularly in this context. The second is, I made 2 points about modesty in the context of this year. The first was expertise. And that comment, I think, has nothing to do with our topic today. Any Peshat, you want to say Peshat in Masay, you want to say Peshat in Vayikra, and how whether the mincha offering was offered this way or that way. I think the same thing applies. Don't voice a Peshat with anything other than modesty. And with an awareness of what you know about Diktuk and not Diktuk. You sometimes hear people voicing opinions on Passukim where they're just mistranslating the words, or they haven't understood the grammatical form, and the Peshat's a joke, and sometimes not. So the first point I made about modesty is in general, whether it's a sensitive matter like gracious, or whether it's a slightly less sensitive matter like Vayikra. The truth is, how the mincha offering was brought is ultimately just as sensitive. Why would you want to voice a nonsensical opinion about how carbon is offered? I agree with you. No, not paralyzed. Modest and aware of. We walk in so many areas of our life. We walk a gesher tzamod, a narrow bridge between modesty and paralysis, and that is what life is about. You're 100% right. You can't. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us minds, and unlike answering telephone services, we can't outsource those minds to other people. The mind is described as the Pe'er HaBriyah, that which is most beautiful in creation. The Kuzari describes the mind as the Malach, the angel that is the interface between us and Hashem. The only vehicle we have to make sense of this life is our minds. If we outsource thinking, then we're finished. What allows us to be Maminim? What allows us to be Mekabelei Torah? What allows us to stand at Sinai? What allows us to connect to Hashem? Only our minds. So we need to use our minds. And on the other hand, we need to be appropriately modest and understand our limitations and what we are competent to and what we're not. And that is the gesher tzamod that we need to walk. And that bridge is the same in tax law. In I don't mean to compare the Torah and Chol, but it's the same in any field of life. And 100% is true. Obviously, it's true within Torah where we're dealing with such fundamental matters. And how the mincha offering is brought, or where the Mikra was, is also a fundamental matter of Torah truth. And therefore, the same modesty applies to that. The final point I added was that particularly when we're dealing with Ikri Adas, when we're dealing with principles of faith, that modesty is appropriate. But this is not chas v'shalom a call for paralysis. I think both halves are equally dangerous. The Yiddish guy that's so frozen that we can't say anything anymore is a dangerous thing. I have to say, I mean, I'll give an example from Inyan Yoma, and I'm veering off subject, but you asked me a question, so I'm going to have to do that. There was a lot of discussion around. Okay, I mean, you know what? This deserves a series in its own right. I'm going to give a series on innovation and tradition in Yiddishkeit. That will be it's something that just remind me afterwards. I've been fumbling around thinking about what my next series will be in the Sunday morning. We've ended up quite nitty-gritty and maybe moved away from life's big questions. So we'll go back to, I don't know if it's one of life's big questions, but certainly one of Yiddishkeit's big questions. I'll try and give a series on this point of the gesher tzamod, the narrow bridge that we walk between innovation and tradition, and how to balance that more generally in life. It affects so many areas of anything current that occurs. We have no choice but to address through the lens of Torah, and anyone who feels the weight of tradition on their shoulders realizes that's a challenging endeavor. And this can be about dealing with the Holocaust, this can be dealing with the state of Israel, which poses completely new challenges, and theological and practical. But what's meant to do? Do we not paskin? Do we not have a hashkafa?
Yeah, I'm also just pointing up and see that into the universe, and then starting with the confidence, eventually is the Mikra, which is itself an innovative idea.
I 100%, and I've tried to say this point, that there's so many areas where we casually do it without noticing. We learn a Hamak Dover and we're not bothered. Okay, but he was the Hamak Dover, but we learn Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, who lives in our own lifetimes and we're not bothered. We casually read Boichin Klois V'Leiv. We casually read the Rakia, the dome that is over that thing. So we translate it without even noticing differently. So I'm saying that half of what you're saying, and I'm also appealing to modesty. Both halves are true, 100%. We shouldn't be afraid of exploring these ideas because we do it in so many other areas. On the one hand, on the other hand, let's be modest about it. Yeah. Okay, so because I ran out of time in this series, we're looking at modern Peshat. We're not really looking at modern Midrash. Now, you're 100% right that after Midrash, the creation of Midrashim ceased somewhere around, I don't know, the year 800 or so. And by the year 1000, with Rashi and Rashbam and Ibn Ezra, a renewed focus on Peshat developed. And very interesting, around the 1600s, a return to Midrashic reading emerged. And you have the Archaeology HaKadosh and others in the Sephardi world, and in the Ashkenazi world, primarily the Hasidim, but not only the Hasidim, who begin saying modern Midrash. And they advance Pshatim in Passukim, which don't fit Peshuto Shel Mikra. You can't read the whole narrative like that. And they learn the Passukim as teaching great Midrashic or moral or spiritual truths in a way that doesn't align with Peshuto Shel Mikra. And sometimes, when I say it doesn't align with Peshuto Shel Mikra, also it's innovative in how it's understanding grammatical rules and the like. The only difference I would say to your formulation is, I don't think these people didn't know grammar. I mean, certainly figures like the Archaim and the masters of Chassidus and so on knew grammar perfectly well. These were results like Kohen. These were world-class who knew exactly what they were saying. But they believed there was a Chelek Torah to be uncovered of Midrash, and we can call that modern Midrash if you like. So that's again maybe another subject. How to deal with this? Okay, I'm conscious of the passage of time, and I just want to try and make my final points around this, which is, as I said, I think in many ways we don't need innovative Peshat readings around this topic, and we have so much in our classic sources. And therefore, all I want to do is just share with you some classic sources, long before the advent of evolution, long before the advent of modern views around the age of the universe and the like. And I'll just try and take you on a tour of this matter. We have the Rambam in his Moed Vachim, who famously understands the 7 days of creation as being stages of creation, as opposed to literal passage of time. And he understands it to be stages in creation. That's where he understands the concept of Yom is. Thus says the Rambam in Moed Vachim. Rashi, on the very first pasuk of the Torah, applies the principle of Ein Muktam U'Ma'ucha B'Torah to the at least the opening section of the description of Bereshis. Now, how far Rashi would go and how he would analyze this in the context of 7 days of creation is not entirely clear in Rashi. You have to have a look at it. But Rashi is addressing a textual problem about but he hasn't yet created the Oretz, because that's only on a later day when he separates, when the Yam is gathered together and the Oretz emerges and so on. And Rashi doesn't just say, well, it's like a general introduction followed by more specific filling in, like some other like some other Rishonim say. Even a Gemara, one of Chazal say such an answer to the question. Rashi says about this, about the order of the description of the creation of the Torah. Then you have an amazing and incredible source, and this is I don't know what to make of this. I'm scared saying this. I'm hesitant saying this, but I'll just share with you the Maramakim. There is a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah that discusses Machlokas Tanoim when the world was created. Was it created in Nisan or Tishri? And the Gemara, and we have a contradiction in our modern day practice. On the one hand, in Tishri we stand with Hayom Haras Olam. On the other hand, in calendar calculations, for example, Bechas HaChamor, we do it in Nisan. So it remains a sort of almost a contradictory model of how we live when it was created. Then we have another Chazal, which for textual reasons, picking up on Bereshis borrowed Kim Es Hashemayim V'Haaretz, the fact that the term used throughout chapter 1 of Bereshis to describe the creation of the world is Kim, which is Midas Hadin, says that originally Mitzchila Ola B'Machshava, originally it arose in the Machshava of Hashem to create the world with Midas Hadin, and in the end he creates Shittuf in Midas Rachamim. He actually created the world using the Midah of Rachamim, which is Hashem Elokim or Yotze Vavke and so on. Again, I'm not going to go into this in too much depth, but Hashem originally wanted to create a world that existed somehow with one plane of operation, and then he created a world that existed on another plane of operation, Rachamim. So this is a second source of Chazal. Then we have a third set of contradictions between Bereshis chapter 1 and chapter 2. For example, in the description of the creation of human beings, were they created only as male, of which a female was taken and created, or were they created somehow as male and female together, and maybe in some form of androgynous form, and the like. Tosfos in Rosh Hashanah compiles these forms together, and he gives a resolution to this issue. And he says that even when it comes to Tishri and Nisan, we should understand, and when it comes, he compares it also to the creation of male and female, we should understand that the world was somehow the theoretical creation of the world, the machshava creation of the world, the plans creation of the world, the architect model of the creation of the world, the thought level of creation of the world is Tishri, and the actual physical creation of the world is Nisan, and Tosfos aligns this with the machshava and maisa of din and rachamim, and the machshava and maisa of how human beings were created. Now, the extension of Tosfos' thought is that he seems to be saying the whole of Reishis chapter 1 is the mitzchila olah b'machshava, the machshava thought level of creation, and chapter 2 of creation is the actual creation. And in chapter 2, all we have of creation is that God brought into existence the heavens and the earth and all the living forms without any of the details with which we're familiar with. So it seems that even in the world of the Bali Tosfos, not in the world of the Rambam and Mizmor, in the world of the Bali Tosfos, as far as I can understand, he seems to be saying that chapter 1 of Reishis can be understood as a mitzchila olah b'machshava. The whole description of creation is the Elokim creation of the world. But the real creation of the world, Rashi brings this, by the way, on the first book of Mitzchila olah b'machshava, again, it's Rashi. The real creation of the world wasn't made with Shem Elokim. So when you read the first chapter of Reishis, you should know you're reading a chapter of olah b'machshava. I just present that to you for thought. I say this very tentatively and with great nerves actually. But have a look at the Rashi, Mitzchila olah b'machshava. Have a look at Tosfos and Rosh Hashanah and the Sugya over there. And this is a sort of second idea that I wanted to present. The final thing in the concluding moments I want to mention is that the Torah itself, and this is picked up by the Rishonim, when it describes Hashem bringing life into existence, doesn't say it in a clean way. In other words, it doesn't just say, God said, let there be life, and there was life. Instead, Hashem seems to bring the physical existence into a partnership with him in creating that. So, for example, the Pasuk says, let the earth bring forth living creatures. Why should the earth bring forth living creatures? Hashem says, let there be light, and there was light. Let there be lions, and there's lions. He doesn't say that. He says, let the earth bring forth living creatures. In other words, somehow implanted in the earth is the ability, earth, raw material, is the ability that out of earth should grow living creatures, should emerge living life forms. These are the Passukim. Yishrut sumayim, let the waters swarm with living creatures. So it seems that somehow within the Passukim is a message not just of Hashem saying, let there be life and there was life, but implanted in non-organic material is the ability somehow for organic life to emerge. Again, I don't know entirely what to make of that, but I share that with you as well. And the Rishonim pick up on this in two ways. The first is a very unclear pasuk. And have a look at the Sfana on the pasuk, have a look at the Ramban at length on the pasuk, have a look at the Targum Unctus on the pasuk. Very difficult sequence in the Ramban. Vayitz Hashem lekim es ha'adam ofam in ha'adama, vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim, vayihi ha'adam lenefesh chaya. And man, does this translate as into existence came man that was instantly a living creature? Or as the Ramban brings from the Targum and explores the meaning of this, does it mean that there was man and man turns into a speaking creature? In other words, there was a man that was not a speaking creature, that then as a second stage of creation became a speaking creature, was somehow given that which was godly. The Passukim, and with this I'll conclude, the very Passukim that describe the creation of man, Na'aseh Adam b'Tzalmenu, let us make man in our image. Rashi picks up on this, who is the us who's making man in the image. And the Ramban says an idea that again is in many ways very classic, and yet relevant to our conversation, in which he says Hashem partnered in creating with man and said to all of creation, join in the creation of man. The oretz, the land, brings out the body of a man, which is in the same way as it did with the behema and with chaya. The ruchnius forces contribute to a man, because a man is an amalgamation of that which is physical and that which is spiritual. So I'm rushing through this because our topic ultimately is Peshat and Midrash. I simply want to conclude, as I said, with two thoughts. With a great deal of modesty, we have the view of Rav Kook, Rav Hirsch, and others who say that in and of in itself, the application of Rav Sadigan's principles to scientific insight into the age of the universe is not one that we should be afraid of. It doesn't pose philosophical challenges. And if it has crossed the threshold of reason or evidence, we should be comfortable with that. This isn't apologetics. This is how Torah is designed to operate. And but we need to be modest. We need to have a great deal of scientific understanding. We need to understand that theories come and go. Rav Hirsch points that out. Rav Kook points that out. Nonetheless, if one's understanding of science is that this is there to stay and has crossed that threshold, we should be open to that. And secondly, when we read the Peshuto Shel Mikra, I think the Passukim have more nuance to them than is understood in the classic understanding. We have a Mona Vuchen that understands as conceptual. We have a Rashi that, to some degree or other, it's not clear how far he goes, speaks about Ein Muktam and Ma'ucha, that we discussed Ein Muktam and Ma'ucha as a tool in Peshat and Midrash, that the Torah isn't necessarily written chronologically. It's not the only way to understand Torah. We have a Tosfos that seems to understand the first chapter of Bereshis as being an Olav Machshava, as some form of spiritual or theoretical creation, as opposed to the actualized creation. Creation takes place in two stages. It takes place in Tishri, in the world of conception. We say in Rosh Hashanah, by the way, Tosfos points out, Hayom Haras Olam. Today, we don't say, it's not as it's translated, today's the birthday of the world, it's today's the conception of the world. It's the day in which the world was conceived. Nisan is the day in which the world actually comes into physical existence. There's a creation of a spiritual existence or a conceptual existence, or in the spiritual realm, which is maybe that which is being described in the first chapter of Bereshis, and it's an Olav Machshava creation, a Midas Hadin creation, it's an architect's plan creation, and then there's the actualization of creation, which is maybe chapter 2 of Bereshis. And finally, when we look at the Passukim themselves speak about Totzia, Oretz, that the world somehow puts into it. Nasa Odom, that even the creation of man is a partnership between the physical forces and the animalistic and the spiritual, which is what we understand indeed that man means. So I'll stop here for today, and I'll just end with the tefillah that if anything I've said is everything I've said is tentative around this. So I hope that it opens possibilities rather than definitively sitting here and someone who is very far from being an expert in anything, voicing opinions about Torah. I'm just sharing what some of the thoughts are around this. So I wish everyone a good day. Thank you very much. Yeah, I haven't seen anyone who brings us Tosfos in this context. It's my own. I don't know. It's a Tosfos, but I don't know. I'm amazed it's not brought in the discussion in all like the literature around this.